Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I'm your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Kathleen Willett. Kathleen is the author of Mother of All Secrets and Anything for a Friend. She lives in New York City, where she teaches high school English. Kathleen is the mom of 2 young girls and a very fluffy cat named Mr. Sparkles. For more information, you can visit her at KathleenWillett.com. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so excited to be on with you. I
am so excited. And before we started, Kathleen said she listens to the podcast regularly, and that is like
religiously.
That is so wonderful. So I'm super excited to talk about Anything for a Friend, which is your sophomore novel, and we're going to talk about that later too. But tell our listeners about your book, Anything for a Friend.
Okay, so Anything for a Friend is about a woman named Carrie who has recently moved from New York to Montauk, which is like a remote beach town on the easternmost tip of Long Island. She's hoping for like a fresh start. She's made some recent mistakes in her marriage. She's concerned about the behavior of her teenage daughter. So she's hoping that this move will be like kind of a reset for all of them. But then out of nowhere, her best friend from college, this woman, Maya, who she hasn't spoken to basically since college, so 20 years, calls her and tells her that she's in the neighborhood. So Carrie's kind of like flustered, but says, sure, come on by. Maya shows up with her teenage daughter and reveals that her husband has just passed away very suddenly. So Carrie feels, both equal parts sympathetic and awkward, and impulsively invites Maya to stay with them for a few days. But as soon as Maya and her daughter are settled, like weird things start happening in the house. Carrie's her herb garden is destroyed. Her like college yearbook is mutilated. She's getting like scary text messages. So she doesn't know whether Maya is responsible. Maya's teenage daughter is also kind of giving off some weird vibes. She's like very, very interested in Carrie and her family to kind of a natural degree, I guess. So at the same time, all of this is going on, there are college flashback sections that reveal how their friendship started, what sort of went wrong with their friendship that ultimately led to this big rift. But ultimately, there's what I hope are big twists both in the past and in the present that will hopefully surprise readers.
Yes, definitely they will. And of course, the terror of them above all terrors for me was because Carrie is a writer and like her whole manuscript vanishes from her computer.
Oh, which right. I forgot to mention that one. I know, right?
I've had that happen. I've lost like 40 pages back, when I used to like back things up on like floppy drives, and before there was like the cloud in the way that the cloud is now. And it was kind of like the worst day ever.
Oh my gosh. I haven't had that happen, but I've had the scare for sure. When I log on, I'm like, oh my gosh, where did it go? Where did it go? I start like accusing my husband of messing with my computer. And then I'm like, oh wait, here it is. Never mind. We're good.
Sorry, Nanny. It's not you. Well, I love the fact that in the present, it's Carrie's point of view, but the past is Maya's point of view. And so we actually get 2 very different looks at this relationship, which I really appreciated because it's so true of friendship, right? That like what was going on on one person's side is totally different than especially that age of friendship, right? Like when you are college is such a crazy time, such a chaotic time. So tell us, do you remember where the idea came from? I always like to hear where the seed of a story comes from.
Yeah, I think there were like a few different kind of sparks that ultimately fused together. One of them was the house guest from hell trope. During COVID, I remember reading a couple interesting stories about like people who live in the city who rented a house upstate or something, and then they refused to leave. So when the owners came back, they were like, we're not leaving. And then they just sort of like weirdly had to co-occupy the space. Or like families who decided to like pod up together and go in on a rental house together, and then like things sort of fell apart. So I thought that the idea of a house guest who has an indeterminate timeline and like sort of just won't leave and is maybe making themselves too much at home. Like
Yeah.
one of my nightmares is people reorganizing my things because I really like how I have organized
Right.
them. And in the book, Maya reorganizes Carrie's kitchen, and it's supposed to be like, oh, I thought you would love it. And Carrie's like, I do
I
not love
know.
it.
I don't even like when my family does that. I'm like, wait, this is not where this goes. Like, you guys,
Totally.
I'm in charge of where things go in this house. Um, well, tell
And
us. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so, you know, usually, and I don't know I want to hear a little bit about your publishing history because this is your second book, which is such a different experience in general from the first book. So tell us, you know, how did it happen for you at Lake Union? Your first book is also from them, Mother of All Secrets. So tell us, like, how long, you know, was that your first book? How long did it take you to find an agent, a publisher? This is good for all those people who are still aspiring to, you know, publish their first book, because it can be a really hard process, or else you'll be one of the people who won the lottery. So tell us.
Yes, no, definitely. It can be a totally hard process. So I did write my first book kind of quickly. I got this like seed for an idea, and I had just taken some time off teaching to like be home with my kids, and my younger one in particular had been born like more recently. And I wrote it really fast. I did find an agent for that book, and that was the first book that I wrote and the first book published. But it has not been all sunshine and roses since then. I've
Right.
definitely written a couple books since that I've like shelved either for now or forever. This is not the second book that I've written. It's like the fourth or fifth book that I've written. But I feel like I've come to view those books as like practice. Like, you know, it's like if you're an athlete or something, which I am not, but if you're an athlete, like you have like practices, you have games that you lose, you have games that you win, but it's all part of the experience. So like,
Right.
even though not every book that I've written will be published, I think that like I got better by writing those books, and like more ideas occurred to me as I was writing them. So I totally don't view them as like wasted time or failures, just like, you know, yeah, just practice.
And so do you have a sense for like what went wrong? You know, like now that you look back on those, you've got another successful book and it's coming out. Do you kind of have a sense for like, oh, I see what I did? Was it like a plot problem, not a big enough plot to carry you through? Were the characters off? Like, that's sometimes helpful to see.
Yeah, totally. That's such an interesting question. I think it was like me trying to do things that I really liked in other books, but that didn't come naturally to me. Like, I love unlikable narrators and stuff, like just these like evil, rich women. Um, so I tried to write a character like that, but it just like it wasn't the right kind of unlikable. Um, yeah, things like that. Like I think I really struggle with timelines that jump around a lot. Like I know this book has trips into the past, but it's still pretty linear.
Yeah, it's two, right? Two parallels.
Yeah, right. So I feel like sticking with what feels natural, like that, you know, writing shouldn't feel like, I think this was a quote from like Seth Meyers or something, like a comedy writer, but he was like, it shouldn't feel like pushing a stroller up a hill. It should feel like it's like flowing. So yeah, I think the
I love
times
that.
I've,
Seth,
I know,
I
love it
totally,
too.
but I totally feel like it's like a lot of times it's like pushing a stroller up a hill, or
yeah,
even something
no, I feel
without
like
wheels, you know. But yes, I think that's, once you get into it, I think the struggle for me is always that, like, what am I doing here? How is this going to work? And that's so fun. Well, I think that's really, I mean, it's incredible that you just like, you had a really, you know, fast first success, and then you're like, okay, now it's the digging in part. And as you said, it's like Malcolm Gladwell, right? 10,000 hours. It takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. And, you know, what we're doing now is accumulating hours.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
good for
Just,
you.
like staying like sharp and engaged and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky too that I have a job that like allows me to talk about books all day. So I
Yes.
can kind of like, you know, dig into other authors' craft elements with students, which is fun.
Well, I don't imagine you get to read a lot of thrillers in class. Is that true?
That
More
is
like
true. Yes.
classics.
That is
I
definitely
mean,
true.
there's some thriller elements in like Mice and Men and stuff, but not quite the kinds that we read all the time. Although when you mentioned Montauk, did you ever read The Change?
Oh no, it's on my Goodreads TBR. I should bump it up now that you've mentioned it.
It's so funny. It is like one of those books, and I think I've talked about it in like somewhere, but it's set in Montauk, and that's what made me think of it. But it's another super fun non-thriller is where my mind was getting that. So let's talk about your life because it's super chaotic. In addition to living in New York City, which I think of as being chaotic, and I was telling Kathleen I'm going to try to live in New York for a month this next spring in 2024. But you have little kids, it sounds like, and a full-time job where you deal with like not little kids but kids all day, and so that takes a certain type of energy, all of that, right? And then you also write. So how, and I assume somewhere there's also like there's a dad in there, and he's involved, but how do you find the time, and how do you switch gears so dramatically?
Well, so when I wrote Mother of All Secrets, my first book, like I said, I wasn't teaching at that point, but I was with my kids full time and they weren't in school full time yet. So I really would just find these like pockets of time, like an hour during nap time and maybe an hour at like 8 o'clock after they went to bed. I can't wake up at 5 o'clock. I know a lot of writers do that, but I cannot. But so I feel like it made me more efficient because I would spend a lot of my non-writing time just thinking about it. And then so once I sat down to write, I was like, okay, like these kids are going to be awake soon. Come on, hurry up, and like kind of push myself to just write as much as I could, which I think also made me like less critical of what I was writing. I was like, it doesn't matter, just get it down, like get something down. And I love that. Yeah, I love that saying, like, you can't edit a blank page. Like, just it's okay if the first draft is bad. And I've heard so many other writers on your podcast talk about this, that like the first draft is going to be sloppy. Just let it be.
Shitty
and
first
get it
draft
down so that you have something to work with. So, but yeah, so I've never had like hours to devote to it, but I think for some reason that's like maybe worked better for me. Like that if I did have 6 hours, I would probably like procrastinate and like be more critical of what I was writing. And like, so and same thing now with being back teaching full time. Yeah, like I'll just try to find an hour, at lunchtime or from 3 to 4 or whatever. And I find that, what I get done in that hour is like, I'm happy with it.
Yeah. You kind of, I mean, I did that too, the working full time and writing books. And it was kind of interesting, like on the commute or, I mean, just those little tiny pockets. And I think you're right in the sense that if you have 15 minutes, you're like, okay, what can we get done in 15 minutes?
Yeah,
and what's
totally.
useful for that is that Pomodoro method. Have you ever used that?
No.
So that's the little timed sprints. And so because I did exactly what you're doing for a lot of years when I was writing, and then in 2006 I started to write full time, and it was weird. I was like, you just can procrastinate the whole day, right? So easily, you can do nothing. So there's this method where you set a timer. I think that technically it's 25. Tessa Wager's always like 25 minutes, 25 minutes. I like 15 minutes because it feels more manageable, but you do 15 minutes, 5 minutes off, 15 minutes.
Oh.
And then try to do it 4 times like if I can in a row. And in the 5 minutes, I like chug water, I, go to the bathroom or stand up and do jumping jacks but you try to not let your fingers stop moving. So I kind of feel like we're basically creating an environment like the one you live in. So
I love that. Oh, I'm totally going to think about that. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
So tell us a little bit about your writing process. Are you somebody who like knows a story? Is it a seat of the pants? What works for you?
I think I'm a total mix. Yeah, and I've like heard and been so interested in hearing other authors talk about this, like plotter or pantser and so forth. And I think I'm somewhere totally in between, where I usually have like the premise and I guess the rising conflict in my head pretty precisely, or like, write it down, outline it pretty precisely. So that might be like the first 50 pages or so. And then I have like a list of like some things that I know are going to happen, like just some scenes, some like, moments of intrigue, I guess, maybe one big twist. But I don't necessarily know, I don't have like an outline for the whole book or like a 20 or 30 page, extensive outline, but just like some bits and pieces, some scraps really, like, yeah, like here's a list of 10 things that I think each of these will make up a chapter. So here's 10 chapters and maybe they're more or less in order, but maybe not, and like a few brief character sketches, and like in the end, here's what I imagine like two women sitting on like a stoop and like a car driving away, you know what I mean, like just
Mm-hmm.
some things in mind. But I also like am very open to being wrong about where I thought it was going as
And
I'm
so do
writing.
you write in order, or do you sometimes pick up one of those threads that you know will come later in the story and write it because it's the thing at the top of mind?
Yeah, definitely. So like because I'm so determined to write something like each day, sometimes I'll be like, okay, I don't really know what's going to happen next, but I know this flashback scene is coming later, so I'll just write that so that I get, 500 words today or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I read in a book, I read Story Genius, and she talked about how going chronologically is really important, and that kind of bummed me out because I was like, oh no, is there something wrong with, but people have so many different ideas about the right way to do it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
She may be a genius, but I disagree. I also think like it's like you said, it's like getting words down, right? I mean, who
Yeah, yeah.
cares? Who cares how you get them down? And I don't. I actually do know lots of authors who write completely out of order, including like Elizabeth Strout, who's amazing. You know, who's obviously she's like won the Pulitzer and stuff, so she knows what she's doing, and she just like lays them all out then and tries to figure out how they fit together. So I think, yeah, forget
Okay,
that.
well, good. That makes me feel better. And yeah, I've seen people do like very intricate index card work, and I feel like that's sort of like they're probably not writing chronologically because they're fitting it
No.
together after the
Yeah.
fact. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there are some people who just can't, I tend to really write in order unless I'm kind of coming down the pike to the end and I know like I'm a little confused, but it's really tight. I know exactly kind of where we're going. The scenes are probably they all happen within the same afternoon or whatever. So I can kind of skip around a little bit. But until then, I feel like I have to write in order. So I kind of, I may be on that, I may agree with her for me, but I don't agree with her for everybody at all. So, but I don't think anything works for everybody, right?
Yeah, totally.
So
Yeah.
both of your books really set around motherhood, the pressures and the struggles. I mean, and I love that because I think one of the things I know you've heard me talk about on the show, which I like to talk about on the show, is really just that. Of course, I love being a mother. It's if I look back on my life, those are the two things I've done, or put into the universe that I'm like most proud of. But it's also like the hardest job, and there's this sense that we're supposed to, I mean, like the whole Oprah two sides of the women who work and the women who stay at home, and there's all the infighting, and it's supposed to be this like seamless thing, like getting pregnant is supposed to be super easy, and then you just it's all sort of a crock of shit really when you come down to it. It's the
Totally.
hardest thing. So tell us like what makes you explore that theme, and and how does that help you as a mother?
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I feel like when I became a mom, that was really exactly when my like creativity kind of cracked open. But I feel like I had so much to purge in a way. Like it's true. Like it was of course it's such like a joyful time, blah, blah, blah. But it's also so filled with like self-doubt and just rethinking the way you thought things were, and also just worrying. Like now I feel like I'm constantly thinking of worst case scenarios, and obviously that's really conducive to thriller writing because thrillers are kind of like worst case scenarios played out.
Totally.
But yeah, I feel like my like it just does something to your emotional depth as well.
Yeah.
Like I'm yeah thinking about people and the human experience in a whole new way. But yeah, I think motherhood has a lot like is very conducive to suspense writing.
Yeah. And it's true. You said, I mean, I think I'm a worst case scenario thinker too. And my children would definitely agree. I think, and it is interesting to have you'll see this, to raise children as a thriller writer. Like my daughter ended up being a criminology major. She's like,
Mm.
but they do have, because you kind of can't help the way you are. And of course your children pick up on it. That they sort of understand like mom's brain's a little crazy, and I didn't let my son has not read my books yet, but I told my daughter she had to wait till she was 30. She's not 30 yet, but she did start reading them, when she was late teens. But it is interesting for her to reflect on, wow, mom, like this is so, when your kids read your books and then they're like, You are a little bit, you're a tiny bit crazy, mom. So,
I'm
but
scared for that. Yeah, I know it will happen one day. My kids are first grade and pre-K, so they're nowhere near that. But my first grader is definitely my number one like hype PR woman. She tells everyone, she's like, if we're at Starbucks or something, she's like, "Mommy's book is coming out soon." To like the
that's so
barista.
right.
Yeah, it's really
That's
cute.
that is so cute. So what about, so then you're in like, I also love, what I also love about this book is the dynamic between the two teenage girls, right? Because there's a very, that's really interesting too. And especially since both of them have had their own, you know, a little bit of trouble, or we sense that one's had trouble, and we know from Carrie that her daughter's had trouble. And so the question I guess I have is like, you know, when you're with teenagers all day, is that sort of what informs, because you write teenagers really, really well. I'm more
Oh,
recent to
thank
this
you.
experience. But I, you know, do you feel like you're sort of, that was easy to do because of your day job, or do you feel, obviously these are not anybody that you teach. We know that these are not real people. So we'll say that to all the moms who might be
Yes.
listening and saying,
No, of course.
wait, my kid has Mrs. Willett. I hope to God that's not my child. And it's not. But, you know, but I do wonder about like having spent that time, is that sort of how, you know, the aspects of this book that are about the teenagers, is that sort of where that came from?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I have now spent like years and years of my life around teenagers, and it's such a like a hard, fraught time, and they're dealing with so much, and their feelings are so real, and like their experiences are so real, and I think people are kind of quick to be like, oh, but there's no real consequences, and oh, it's just a crush, or oh, you're just sad that you're grounded. It's not a big deal. It is a very big deal to them. It's their
Of
life.
course, of course.
Yeah, and I also always found it interesting that and like this is true in the book, like I think teenagers really save their worst, maybe all kids, but they save their worst selves for their parents. So
Yeah.
like I would have parents ask me like, oh, is so and so is she like engaged in class? Is she keeping up with the work? Is she like how's her behavior, because at home she's like a nightmare, and I was like, in class she is literally a delight, like
Yeah.
she is so wonderful. So I always thought it was interesting when I kind of learned that like someone was different at home than they were at school, but I mean, of course, yeah, it's because they feel safest showing their vulnerability to their parents, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
No.
But
But they also,
another thing I thought,
yeah, they share their yucky side too. I feel like you get, you know, they can pretend all day that everything's fine, and they get home and then they like let loose on everything that's not fine. Because, like you said, this is, I mean, particularly these teenagers, COVID, the wars, I mean, it's just the anxiety, social media. I don't,
oh my gosh, yeah, social media. It's like we didn't have to deal with this, but that is just a
uh-uh.
whole other layer.
It is. And, you
Yeah.
know, it's funny because, of course, we know looking back, like this too shall pass. You'll look back on this and it won't be a big deal. But of course, it's a big deal in the moment. It's all they know, right? And it's the biggest deal they've ever dealt with, because stuff when they were younger was easier. So it's really like we can't minimize. Um, I mean, I think you can't minimize what they're going through, particularly now. I don't think we understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really, really like hard teenagehood is such a hard time anyway. And then this is a particularly hard time probably to be a teenager. Um, I think sometimes too, and like adults do this as well. This comes up in the book, but that teenagers think other teenagers are having an easy time. So because people, and like I said, adults too, like some people are able to kind of fake it and seem like, oh, this is so being social is so easy for me, and um, look a certain way or whatever, but that those teenagers too are grappling with insecurity and
Of
demons and
course.
self-doubt, and yeah.
Yeah, of course. I don't know. I mean, and I'm sorry, but I think you know, adults, we're a big hot mess too. So, at least I feel like I am. So, I don't know. I don't know anybody who's just like, whoa, this life is thing is so easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super, super complicated. And one of the other things I think that I like, you know, in the book is the relationship between, you know, obviously Carrie's husband knew Maya when they were, you know, younger and friends and whatnot. And there is this sort of sometimes a sense of like him taking Maya's side, if you will. Like when Carrie feels awkward, he sort of like downplays it, which I think is a thing that, you know, oftentimes men do to us, like, oh, you're exaggerating, it's, and so I think it's another way of sort of isolating Carrie in this situation where her job is isolating, her child is not being great, she doesn't lives in a town that is new to her, and then her husband is sort of like, oh, it's no big deal. It is really it's really, I mean, that's an interesting dynamic in their marriage too.
Yeah, definitely. Like that, gaslighting can occur even when it's not meant as gaslighting and when it's
Mm-mm.
meant really innocently, but that he's still kind of like dismissing her feelings and concerns and not really hearing her.
Right. And then, of course, what happens in that sense is that she starts to worry more about it, right? Like, she's like, am I actually crazy, or is this really happening? I mean, I think that's, that is another trick, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I do love seeing the difference between like what those girls were like in college, because we aren't always our best selves that young, right? I mean, college.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think people arrive at college like so confused, kind of like because
Mhm.
they kind of want to be someone else, and make a really good first impression. It's still, and like technically you're adults, but you're totally not adults.
No.
It's such a like, yeah, it's a time of like such exploration. That was another thing that kind of intrigued me as I started the book, this concept of like ride or die friendships, because I think the friendships that you
Yes.
form in college are just so intense. It's like you're brushing your teeth next to these people. They're your new family, like
Yeah.
you don't live with your family, you're sleeping 9 feet away from someone.
Right.
So you'll do anything for them, but sometimes I found that like we would support each other in making bad decisions as opposed to trying to talk each other into making better decisions. Like that was the mark of a true friendship, that like you're doing something that's not smart or safe, but I'm going to support you every step of the way.
Right. It's like
So because yeah.
yeah, like mob mentality. We lose our minds and everyone's like,
Yeah.
of course, that's a great idea. Right.
And like prioritizing loyalty over anything else. And that's, I mean, that's what happens in the book, that like they kind
Yes.
of make a terrible decision in the name of loyalty to each other,
Yeah.
that can't be undone.
No, and I love the sort of the way it ends too, which we're not going to talk about because you have to go read it. But I think that is, that is another, it's very satisfying. It's not expected, but very satisfying. So I thought that was really fun too. So, and this is out November 14th. Um,
Yeah.
so, and so right now, when you're listening to this, it's already available. You should go grab your copy right now. Now we have to ask, and I hate when people do this because I think it's so unfair, because you've done all this hard work, you have a book you're celebrating, and now we want to know what you're working on now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I did write another book over the course of like the last year or so that I think will be ready for submission soon. So hopefully it will end up finding a publishing home. But who knows? It might end up being another book that will file under practice. But I do really like it. It's about a woman. It's still kind of in the realm of like motherhood centric suspense, but it's about a woman who meets a much younger mom on the playground, and their kids find each other and they become friends. But the first mom becomes convinced that the much younger mom is like trapped in an abusive marriage of some kind, just based on some concerning clues. However, like the first mom, like her sister recently died, and she's having all kinds of trauma related to that. So there are some questions as to whether the mom that she met is even real or a figment of her imagination. But
Oh, so fun.
suffice it to say that their worlds are like very entwined. And actually, this totally came in the form of a real thing that happened. Like I was on the playground with my kids. My daughter found some boy. She was like, "This is my new best friend. We have to go find his mom immediately so that we can have all kinds of play dates with them." And the mom, yeah, she was just like much younger than most moms that I meet. And when I went up to her and was like, "Oh, hey, our kids found each other, and my daughter would love to have a play date if you're ever up for it," like, she was like, "Thank you so much for approaching me." And it was sort of this. It was really interesting, and so my imagination went in all kinds of directions, which I'm sure everything was completely fine and normal, but it was
Yeah.
just like a little encounter that kind of like stuck with me. So
Yeah,
that's
she's
basically the
probably,
first.
yeah, she's probably lonely, right? Like, I mean, that's the other thing about motherhood is you have this other person with you all the time, but that person is not a companion, right? They can
Right.
make you more lonely, but I can totally see why you read that and thought, okay, this is interesting. What's going on with this, this woman, what is this woman's story? Which is, I mean, that's why domestic suspense is so popular now, is that there's just so many ways that things can go wrong that it's just
Absolutely. Yeah.
so
And I
fun.
love that it feels kind of plausible, like that it all like hits very close to home. It's like, wow, that could totally be happening in my home, in my neighborhood, to the
Yes,
people that I know. Yeah, I love the plausibility
it
aspect of it.
probably is happening, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly in your neighborhood, maybe not to the people that you know, but you hear about this stuff that's going on and you think, God, how am I missing this? But it's everywhere. So that's that's powerful.
Uh-oh. Oh, sorry, you just froze a little bit, but now we're
I'm
back.
back. Yeah, I heard me throughout, but I did see that you froze for a second. So you had I mean, so can we talk a little bit about publishing? Because it sounds like you had a 2-book deal with Lake Union, or were
Mm.
they one in
It was
one?
just, they're both just one. Yeah, just more than
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you'll probably go back to them?
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been awesome to work with, and yeah, I love
I
my
know.
editor and
I do. I mean, that is something you have to give to Thomas and Mercer and to Lake Union is they can sell some books.
definitely, yeah, they do have that power. Yeah. And I mean
They
they're super like organized and supportive, and yeah, my editor is like really creative. They come up with awesome covers, I think.
Yes, yeah, they do. I think they did a great job. I love that.
Yeah,
Well,
I love the cover.
tell us where everybody can find you on social media, and your favorite spots to hang out.
Um, well, social media, I'm Kathleen M. Willett. And I mostly just use Instagram. Yeah, and I have a website, KathleenMWillett.com. But yeah, I'm active on Instagram, equal parts book pictures and kid pictures.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I adopted my middle initial because there's another Kathleen Willett author. So yeah,
I
that's why I'm
wondered about
Kathleen
that.
M. Willett. Yeah.
It's so funny because actually one of my best friends in the whole world is Albie Willett. So Albie's a family name
Oh,
and Willett
cool.
is her last name, spelled the same way, which I guess is how it's probably
Okay.
always spelled. But I don't think you guys are related. But anyway, but she has the same name, so it's an easy one for me to remember. This is such a fun book, and I think everyone you should go. I mean, I literally read it like in a night and a half. It was just like one of those, like, you just are like, one more chapter, one more chapter. Who needs to sleep? So that was really fun. I really enjoyed, and I love that Carrie's a writer because I think there's something fun about reading about the neuroses of writers and that we have overactive imaginations, right? Which she definitely does.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, she is definitely like yeah, a worst case scenario thinker, as we were talking about. But in my first book, the main character was a teacher, and Carrie's a writer. So I think it's also partly like a lack of
Yeah.
imagination on my part. I'm like, which jobs do I know?
Right. Now you're like, who else do I know that has a different job? But yeah,
Yeah, I'll
you'll
have to like start interviewing my friends to like get a better sense of other careers to put into future books.
yeah, it's so fun. Well, this anything for a friend, Kathleen Will. It was so fun to have you today. Thank you for talking to us about your books and your process and
Oh, it was
everything.
so fun. I love your podcast so much. Thank you
Thank
for recording
you.
it. Seriously, it is like so helpful and inspiring. And I feel like I have all these like writer friends just from listening to your podcast. That's how I met you. Like I went up to you at Thriller Fest and I was like, hi, I love you. Like I love your podcast. And
Well,
you were
that's
lovely and you did not make me feel weird for doing that at all.
yeah, you're not in my book. That's not weird. That's like we all are there. And Thriller Fest, which I know I've talked about before on the show, but it's the International Thriller Writers Annual Conference, always in New York, always now the last weekend of May or first weekend of June, the weekend after Memorial Day. And it is such a fun place to come and meet other writers, aspiring writers, and hugely successful authors are all there together, and it's a lovely supportive community. So I was glad you're there, and obviously you'll be there again.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And I'm so happy that you will be too after your month in New York.
I know, I'm so excited. So yes, I'm putting into the universe and we'll see what comes back at me. Thank you for joining us, everyone, today with Kathleen Willett and Anything for a Friend. We will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.